maybe not necessarily the personnel, because obviously there's been some personnel changes, right? It's just, but what does Purdue do defensively? What do they like to do?
Yeah, so I was able this time around to do a little more of the scouting on the personnel because it was so important. The quarterback is the quarterback. When we talk about the offense, that's really the quarterback, the play caller. Everything flows from there. But on defense, it very much is all 11 pieces are important now to certain degrees, and certain players are more important than others. And, kind of what they were last year, and that kind of sets up why we need to talk about some of the transfers, is what they were last year was the D-line's really good and the secondary is terrible, and the D-line made up for a lot of mistakes that the secondary made and covered some, wallpapered over some dudes getting beat just like a drum regularly.
Yeah. Obviously George Karlaftis is not with that program anymore.
Yeah.
Do they have the ability to continue to work right from that angle of just, if the personnel's not better in the secondary, then what do they do without him?
So, and I looked up his name. I'll start with the other guy because Karlaftis is the obvious headliner. You're not replacing him. There's no player that's going to come in and be a first-round pick that easily. So it is about a facsimilation of, can you generate pressure? And that needs to come, I think, from more than one place. And that answer is no. I don't see enough guys on the roster for Purdue to get that level of pressure where you just couldn't block him, whether it was speed, his hands were great, physical violence, bull rushes inside, outside. He could do all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do have one guy I'm very interested in, and of course it's not a simple read. Scotty Humpich is from Murray State, and he's an exciting player. I really enjoyed watching his film. He's, I think, a primary speed to the outside rusher, and not I think he is. Like, most of his pressure comes from speed to the outside. Explosive dude, 6'3", 6'4". Maybe not, definitely not as strong as Karlaftis, but I think enough strength to hold up. And great hands. The one thing I think you can say that the similarity there is elite hand usage. So he can create some pressure, but then the one game I watched him where he was playing against comparable players is he's playing against Cincinnati. And Cincinnati's a great team. They made the college football playoff last year, but Olafashanu, we've been talking about him with very high expectations. So he should be able to handle a player like that, coming up from Murray State. But he is a player. Like, he is a guy you have to be aware of. I think he can, make a name for himself week one on the national stage, getting some sacks and getting pressure. But overall, Penn State should be able to handle the pass rush for Purdue. And I do think that's an advantage coming into this game as opposed to would have been last year. Yeah. And to answer your first question, because I always feel bad if I gloss over something.
Well, you did.
But it sets the stage now that we know kind of what it's all about. The D-line. It's all about the D-line. And when it comes to defensive scheme, I at least I focus a lot on the coverage aspect because that's where you have the most variety. They run a lot of cover 3 and a lot of single high looks. So everything in the cover 1 family where you have a single high safety and you're playing, 2 corners deep, or you're rolling to cloud coverages or things like that. They play a lot of single high, but they do mix in, 2 high looks, cover 4, essentially. So what that is, and this is typical of a lot of teams, is they're playing soft coverages to keep everything in front of them and let the D-line go to work, right? So enough disguise to try and slow down the quarterback so the D-line can go get to the passer. But when they're not an aggressive team on neutral downs for the most part. They will run blitz a lot because little Manny Diaz here, if they want to get you in negative situations to let their pass rush take over.
Yep.
But then when they get to third down, all bets are off. They played a lot of cover 0 last year, which is no safety. So, by the way, if you don't know, cover blank means how many safeties are there deep? 1 safety. Cover 2, that's 2 safeties. Cover 3, and so on and so forth. And it means the deep defenders. So you work in corners and stuff like that. But they run cover 0 a lot, which is man coverage, no safety, all out pressure.
And I mean, just from what you were able to see, I mean, how prudent is that of that? I mean, is that risky of them, just given the personnel? And
they gave up a 70-yard touchdown to Notre Dame in one game because a guy ran a slant. The corner didn't tackle the player, and there was nobody else there to catch him. And he went for 60+ yard touchdown, however long it was. So when it works, it works, and when it doesn't, that's the risk reward of playing a defense like that. Yeah. But the bet was, you overload with pressure. You have to pay attention to Karlaftis, and you can get guys coming through the A gap on blitzes, and it's a gamble, but it paid off a lot for them last year.
You touched on this last night on the message board at Blue White Illustrated. Sign up for only $1.
Yeah. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Bloomnit, who put me on to Scotty Humpich. I had him on my list of transfers, but when he said what he said, I bumped him up the list, and that kind of changed my opinion of this defense this year. So, sorry, continue. Tell them all the great stuff that's going on the message board.
That's the BWI community for you, always coming through. No, but what you said last night was something to the effect of banging your head against the wall, committing to running the ball, right?
Yeah.
That if this is the approach that Penn State's going to take, it could actually end up leading to a little bit of a long night. To be honest with you, it reminded me a little bit of Villanova last year, just in the sense of the storyline going into Villanova was, oh, Penn State can't run the ball. You got to run the ball. You got to establish it right now. But also Villanova stops the run. So, you know what I mean? So like that didn't align. And now this offseason, it's been the entire same storyline. Penn State, I think, will probably have an urge to run the football, but I think, as you're suggesting, that might not be the best way to go about attacking this Purdue team.
Yeah, so the defensive tackles are good. Branson Dean, in particular, is a player. He's 6'2", 280, violent hands, very strong, hard to block. Now, you can block him, and he will give up some on double teams, but if you're running inside zone and you have a single block on him and he's not a part of a double team, he'll swim move that. He'll get in the backfield. He'll cause a lot of problems. And then number 90 is the other player. I'm pulling up his name. So when I'm watching film, I'm just seeing the numbers, and I feel bad. Lawrence Johnson is the other guy, redshirt senior, 6'3", 310. He's a good one tech. He's a good nose tackle, but he's more size than strength, I'd say. So at 310, he's hard to move. He's a good football player, but he's not at the same level as Dean is. And if he was, he'd be a first-round pick, because you blend the size with the speed. That's what you get. So that tandem is good. And then the middle linebacker, the Mike linebacker, 43, I believe he's back this year. And this is the problem with Purdue. They brought in a lot of transfers, and it's kind of trying to keep everybody in line of who they are. Kieran Douglas, I believe, is the same 43 from last year. He was their Mike linebacker, and he's a good player. He's a smart player, puts himself in good position, and I didn't see a ton of mental mistakes, physical player. But, the linebackers, in general, I tend to ignore, because if they're good, it means the defensive line is keeping them clean. Yeah. And if they're good, it means that the guys that are making plays in coverage, then I pay attention to those players because they're affecting the football. But in general, you need to be in your spot as a linebacker. That's your job, is to be in your spot. And if you're making plays, it's obvious. I don't really have to be like, oh, I'm going to look in and look at this. And a couple guys do that, and they stand out with technique. And that's when you pay attention to some of the fine details. You see guys like, 43. But really, that's the strength of the defense up the middle. The Mike linebacker and the two defensive tackles. But the depth behind them is not good. It is just not. At least last year, it was terrible. You can take those guys and you can shove them to the sideline. So if Penn State struggles to run the ball early, but then when the second wave of the D-line comes in, you might be able to get some yardage off of those guys.
Is there a delineation, I guess, between maybe not necessarily just running the ball, but running the ball between the hashes and running the ball outside? I mean, is trying to exploit the edges a different story a little bit for this defense, or is it more or less the same idea?
So it depends. Like it depends on. This is when I talk about using outside zone and I talk about using different schemes. Most of Penn State schemes are targeted at the interior of the offensive line.
Right.
That a lot of running schemes are just between the A and B gap, and that's kind of how running works. So when you talk about getting to the outside, Penn State doesn't run a lot of sweeps. They don't run a lot of buck sweeps or pull linemen out into space, other than on counter and power, and that's kind of at the C gap. You don't really get anything too far outside the numbers. There's not a lot of pitches and stuff like that. And when you do those things, typically linebackers can flood into that zone. And when you play, so going back to the coverage, the other part of playing that single high look is that it allows you to throw numbers at the box. So you've got 3 deep, you got a box safety or some guy hanging around maybe 8-9 yards, right? And then he can fill the alley. He can push that stuff back inside. So you may be running away from the interior, but you're still kind of running to numbers. And it's about creating effective, just using running plays effectively, of getting guys to be out of position, out of gap. And then when you get those guys out of gap, see it, hit it, and run for a lot of yards. Because there were times I saw last year, even against like Wisconsin, where this defense was slightly out of gap. You pull and everyone from the backside has to flow to the front side. That doesn't always happen, even with 6-year players. So you get an A gap open. If you get the A gap open, this is where the Nick Singleton thing comes in, is run as fast as you can through the A gap and don't let the guy get you in an arm tackle. Just hit it. And first off, see it, have the patience to see it, let it develop. And then when you see it, be a freight train. I think that's where Penn State can get some yards here. So, this is not a defense you can't run on. And the last part of getting to the outside is their D ends are good run stuffers. And good being relative as in they're competent. I wouldn't say they're elite, but they're good players. They're big bodied. They're physical. Kind of what you want if you don't have an elite pass rusher. So those guys setting the edge of the pocket, that is going to be an issue, I think, for Penn State. So overall, I think Purdue, if there's one thing they can do, they can frustrate you on the ground with numbers or with talent, and then some combination therein. But you can get them. You just have to get them when you have the opportunity. Oh, hey, it's T. Frank. I'm here in my swivel chair to tell you the outro information. So a couple things before you get going, before you click away. The first is, if you want to see the full show, you want to see the full conversation about Purdue, head to bluewhiteillustrated.com. The link is in the description of the video, so you can check out the full conversation. We just gave you a snippet here, talk about the secondary, kind of some how Penn State can defeat the Purdue Boilermakers, all that good stuff. bluewhiteillustrated.com for that. And if you would, something that would help us out dearly is if you could like this video, that'd be great. And better yet, if you could subscribe to Penn State Football, to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube, it would help us to satisfy
the almighty algorithm.
If you surf the internet, you must also pay homage to the almighty algorithm. So help us in our quest, and we will help you in return by telling you all the things about Penn State football. Okay, last thing before you get going. Coming up on August 29th, big announcement. The BWI Daily Edition is going to prime time. The week of the Purdue game, Monday, we are going to be taking the BWI Daily Edition to 7 p.m., and we're going to air it then. We usually do 3 p.m., so if you're one of our live viewers who watches the show as it airs at 3, we're going to 7. I want everybody to know, plenty of time. I'll be letting you know on the channel as we go throughout the next week and a half, but figured I'd let you know now. Blue White Illustrated is going prime time. Okay, now, go watch videos about whatever other thing that you do. What other things are there than football? I don't actually know.